There we go. So this is a recording for Sturgis Library of our on historical fiction with Asha Lemmie, Crystal Hana Kim, Michaela Carter, and Andromeda Romano-Lax. Before we get going, we're going to read each of the authors' bios to give you a little taste of who they are. And then we're going to jump right into our questions. So Asha Lemmie is the New York Times bestselling author of 50 Words for Rain. After graduating from Boston College with a degree in English literature and creative writing, she relocated to New York City, where she worked in book publishing. Asha writes historical fiction that focuses on bringing unique perspectives to life. In normal circumstances, she divides her time between New York, London, and Kyoto. Next, we have Crystal Hana Kim. Crystal Hana Kim is the author of If You Leave Me, which was a Booklist Editor's Choice title and named a Best Book of 2018 by The Washington Post, Literary Hub, The New York Post, and Nylon, among others. She was a 2021 Jerome Hill Artist Finalist, a 2017 PEN America Dow Short Story Prize winner, and has received scholarships from Breadloaf Writers Conference, Sewanee Writers Conference, and Hedgebrook. Her work has been published in Elle Magazine, The Paris Review, Guernica, and Elsewhere. She teaches at Columbia University and is a contributing editor to Apogee Journal. Next, we have Michaela Carter. She is a writer, painter, and award-winning poet. She's the author of the novels Further Out Than You Thought and Lenore in the Morning Light. Her poetry won the Poetry Society of America Los Angeles New Poets Contest, has been nominated for Pushcart Prizes, and has appeared in numerous anthologies and journals. She is the co-founder of the independent bookstore, the Peregrine Book Company in Prescott, Arizona, where she lives with her husband and 2 dogs. And finally, Andromeda Romano-Lax is the author of 5 novels translated into 11 languages, including The Spanish Bow, a New York Editor's Choice, and Annie and the Wolves, which came out this year, which was selected by Oprah Magazine as one of 2021's best and most anticipated historical novels. Born in Chicago, she lived in Alaska, Taiwan, and Mexico before settling on a small island in British Columbia in Canada. So without any further ado, we're going to get going on our questions for tonight. Everyone give a kind of quiet, silent, muted round of applause for everyone. And we're going to start off tonight with a very important question. So to start off, what is your fun elevator pitch for your most recent book? And if you hate the idea of an elevator pitch, feel free to let it take whatever form you'd like. We're going to start off with Andromeda on this one. So take it away.
Oh, yay, I get to start. Okay, 1 minute. So Annie and the Wolves is about a modern day historian named Ruth, who finds her life increasingly intertwined with that of her subject, the 1800s sharpshooter Annie Oakley. When Annie Oakley was young, she was sent away to live with an abusive farm family, whom she would only refer to later as the Wolves. So when this novel opens, Ruth has received a mysterious journal that supposedly belonged to Annie Oakley and promises to reveal secrets from Annie's past. But as the novel progresses, Ruth discovers that the darkest secrets and impulses that she has to face are her own. So this is a novel that's partly historical fiction, partly thriller with elements of speculative fiction, and it's really an exploration of revenge and the allure of changing your past.
I love a good revenge story.
Me too.
I'll go next. If You Leave Me, it came out in 2018. I would say it's a war story, a love story, a family story, and it begins during the Korean War, and it follows Hemi, a young refugee who flees her home with her widowed mother and her younger brother who's sick when the war breaks out. And she finds refuge in Busan in the southern tip of Korea. And there are 2 boys that are kind of vying for her attention. There's Kyungwon, who's her childhood friend, and then Kyungwon's older cousin, Jisoo, who's wealthier and from Seoul. And so the novel is told from those 3 perspectives, as well as Hemi's younger brother and eventually her daughter. And by layering those voices, the novel shows how their lives are shaped by the war that they are trying to overcome. And I would say it's literary fiction, historical fiction. It's really at the heart about Hemi.
And these all sound so great. I know my lineup now for what I'm reading. Excited. Anyway, okay, Leonora in the Morning Light tells the story of the real life genius artist Leonora Carrington, and it follows her as a young woman. She's rebelling against her upper class family in England, and she meets the surrealist artist Max Ernst, who's established and 26 years older than her. She follows him to Paris and starts showing her work with the surrealists, and is in that creative hub. And then this is right before the war. And then when the Nazis invade France, Leonora and Max are separated. He's actually fleeing a camp where he was interned as a German enemy alien, and she is finds her hold on reality becoming increasingly tenuous, and she lands in a Spanish asylum that she has to escape from. And then the other character in it, it's told from both of their perspectives, and then also Peggy Guggenheim, the art collector, who's helping the avant-garde artists who the Nazis referred to as a degenerate escape Europe. And it's really, it's all real people, real events. And so the imagining of it was really like, why and what's happening. And there is a little bit of magical realism. I wanted to say there was zombies in it, but they only appear for a second.
Yes, it's my turn now. Okay.
Go.
So I have only written one novel. 50 Words for Rain is my debut. It came out in September. It was the Good Morning America book club pick and the Barnes & Noble buzz pick. And it is about a young girl named Noriko, who is the illegitimate daughter of an American GI and a Japanese aristocratic woman. She is the product of an affair. And her parents actually met in peacetime. So she doesn't really have anything to do with the war at all, but she's still very much raised with that stigma and in that context. And I describe it as a historical coming of age story. The central relationship in the novel is between Nori, as she's called, and her half brother Akira, who comes to live with her, where she's living with her grandparents who hate her. And he really is the first person to give her an opportunity to be a who instead of a what. And I really had a lot of fun writing their relationship and exploring their sibling dynamic in a changing Japan. So that's 50 Words for Rain.
Thank you, everyone. Like, that's the best way to be like, hey, check out these books. There's so many interesting things going on. I hope everyone makes different copies. Next question we're gonna jump over to Crystal. As long as Crystal's cool with it. So Crystal, starting us off, everyone loves to hear about different writers' research styles and strategies. How do you go about researching your projects, and any fun stories about your most recent work you'd like to share?
Well, like Asha, I've only written one book and I am working on a second one. But I would say for If You Leave Me, the research was difficult because it was my first book, but also I wanted to write a book about the female experience during the Korean War. And when I started looking into the research, I found that it very difficult to find those accounts. You know, there are other perspectives like Kyungwon and Chizu in my novel, male perspectives, and I was able to find memoirs. I was able to find a lot of information about soldiers' experiences, but what about the women? And because they weren't valued during their time, their lives weren't recorded. And so that was really frustrating for me at first, until I was able to think about it and try to shift my perspective and realize that this was then an opportunity for me to dig deeper. And it actually, I guess I don't have fun stories, but it brought me closer to my family, because my maternal grandmother was 14 when the war broke out. And so I did a lot of interviews and oral histories with her. And the stories that she told me were so devastating, and something that, though I had heard snippets over time because I'm very close to her, it just was cast in a different light when I did a formal interview. You know, she told me about fleeing her home, about having to strip the bark off of trees to get to the inner layer because it's softer to eat. Like, she told me all these details that stayed with me, you know? And so it brought me closer to her, brought me closer to aunts on my paternal side. And so I don't think I can think of anything fun, but it, on a personal level, was very meaningful for me. Yeah. What about others?
Well, it was really fun to research this because of getting to go to museums. But I was a little bit like you, Crystal, like because I was really interested in the surrealists. And they're an all male circle of artists. But I knew I wanted to write about a woman and a woman's perspective. And I didn't know, who that was, or if it would be a real person, or, at first I was kind of like writing a fictional person in with these real people I knew about. But even that, I'm like, I need more information. So I was in Europe and was able to go to the Tate Modern in London, and they have a wonderful surrealist gallery section. And there I found a painting by Leonora Carrington. And it was, what year was it? 2014, I think, or 13, maybe it was 13. And I hadn't heard of her before. And I saw this, it was a tiny painting kind of high up, and it was difficult to see. I was pissed it was hung so high on the wall. But I was like, I have to know more about her. And then my husband ended up buying a book about her by Susan Aberth and her art in the gift shop. And I stole it from him right away. And and then that was that. As soon as I read her story and like knew more about her art too, I was like, this is really the story that needs to be told. She's such an amazing person. And I felt like it was the story of her individuation, really, like how she became who she became. She produced more than 2,000 works of art, and she's kind of like, I don't know, I kind of think of her as like the Picasso of Mexico, where she ended up, but more than Picasso, I think. So that was really cool, discovering her. And then when I realized that her self-portrait, her first really important work that she showed in 1938 at the International Surrealist Exhibition in Paris, was it's a major part of the book, and her making of it. I knew I had to see that, and that hangs at the Met. So I was able to go to New York, and they were actually, the first day I should have called to make sure the gallery was open, but I didn't. And, there's that red velvet cord across it. I'm like, okay, well, I'll come back tomorrow. I had a couple days. And I found out, yes, it will be open. It was not open when I got there. And so I just walked around the court. I'm like, fuck it. I'm just doing that. So, and that, like, my heart was beating, and like, wow, I hadn't done like something. I mean, whatever. It was just walking around a court. And then but I found her painting and I was writing about it, and then a guard came up and it's like, you can't be here. Then I opened it up and I had more time with it. But I felt like I kind of understood her a little bit more because of that, because she was always doing things I think that she wanted to do. And when someone's that kind of brave, you think, oh, maybe they're not even scared or something. But I thought, yeah, I think she is. And then I think I saw an interview with her and just like that she, did what she wanted to do, but in spite of being afraid at times. So those were my two kind of museum experiences. And sadly, I have not been able to go to Peggy's collection in Venice yet. And that's, I want to get over there and see that. Yeah, who else?
Go for it, Asha.
Okay. This was my first book, and I did, much like you, Crystal, I found the research element of this difficult because I was writing from such an unsung perspective, if you will. It was tough for me to find direct resources. I relied a lot on my godmother, who is from Japan, and she helped me a lot with the book, and she never had biological children. So it kind of, people often, when we were in Japan together, people often assumed that I was her daughter. And this is where the idea kind of started to take root for me about a character like Nori. And, I thought, well, there have been all of these young women and these mixed race people who, have always existed in society, and you don't really see their stories in history books. So I got to thinking, what can I do? I love historical fiction. It's my favorite genre. It's also Lily Sparkling White. And, I got to thinking, well, what can I do that's a little bit different now that it's time for me to write a book of my own? How can I write a character that I could have related to a little more when I was young, and that hopefully some girls reading this now will be able to relate to? And my saving grace ended up being like documentaries and pictures. Yeah, I bought this whole book of pictures of 1950s Japan. And as I was writing, I was like flipping through it to kind of get an idea. And it was really fun to see the beginning of the book versus the end of the book. There was a lot more modern architecture going into the 60s and 70s. And I just kept thinking, that World War II is often considered the beginning of the modern era. And so that gave me a lot to play with as far as the themes of tradition versus modernity and the new versus the old. And it was a joy to write. And there's a pressure when you're writing about a country that, you don't originate from, because you want to be respectful and you want to be careful. But I also think that fiction is not memoir. I think that fiction is art. And I think that it's an exercise in empathy. And that's what makes it such a powerful medium.
Very nice. Very nice. For my most recent book, I did a lot more of what you would expect using books and online resources. So that's no fun at all. I'm going to go before Annie and the Wolves. Most of my books have involved an element of travel or living abroad. So for my one before Annie and the Wolves, Plum Rains, part of the story takes place in Japan, part of the story takes place in an indigenous village in Taiwan. And my husband and teenage daughter and I moved to this small village, actually chose it because I had constructed this novel in my head about 5 years earlier. And I was essentially waiting for the right setting to bring the novel alive. I don't know if I mentioned, the title is Plum Rains. And so we were able to live there for 6 months. That's the longest contract my husband could get in that village. We actually lived in a school that was founded by the Japanese colonial forces, and just made wonderful friends among all of our neighbors. Very little English was spoken there. And including people whose grandparents still remember the times when the Japanese basically controlled that village. The indigenous culture there is kind of coming back and being celebrated more. So we had a really interesting perspective into a place and a culture that actually is barely written about. There's very little you can find in terms of archives, memoirs, anything else. So just that experience of being somewhere, talking with people, and then as all of you know, serendipity, the chance things that happens, meeting the right people, that's been true for all of my books. But for me, it often starts with travel, just going to the place where the story is set.
That's so cool. I got to go to Japan a few times while I was writing this, but I didn't, at the time, I was a 23-year-old receptionist making like $14 an hour. So actually living there wasn't yet a possibility for me, but I'm currently in the process of purchasing an apartment.
Oh, wow.
So I will be able to spend a lot more time there if I have any more ideas for books.
Congratulations about that too. Yeah. Yeah. I with travel, I think that's really, God, that's so great that it leads to your stories and drama, like your novels. It was like the travel, I think, like led me to this, but then I didn't travel to the place. I was so tempted to, I wanted to. There's so many places in my book that I was like, oh my gosh, I want to go there, and this, the town that Leonora and Max lived in, and see the house. And then I thought, no, well, you know what? Maybe I can know enough just from the photos in the various books. And they all kind of wrote their own books too. So many characters and minor characters in my book wrote their own books. That I had so much to go off of, but the places I sort of dreamed up. So I wonder how, like, I kind of want to go there after the fact. I want to, and I don't want to. It's like, how wrong was I? But it's okay. It's fiction.
Can I just interrupt to say that when I was invited to be on this panel, I was not familiar with Leonora in the Morning Light, which, as I've told Michaela, my husband and I are now reading aloud. We read aloud every Friday night, which really, so it takes a long time to get through a book. But so we've had 2 Friday nights so far reading this book. And we had seen Leonora Carrington's statues in Guanajuato, Mexico. We lived in Mexico for 1.5 years after Taiwan. And when I saw those statues and realized that this was a woman I didn't know anything about, like a Georgia O'Keeffe caliber woman artist that I didn't know anything about, I thought, I hope somebody writes a book about her. So it was so wonderful. Because of this panel, I found out about this book.
I just love the name Leonora.
Yeah, it's a beautiful
That's
title.
a beautiful name. It's a beautiful title.
Mhm.
Andromeda, that's just so amazing. It's like such an honor, like you're reading it aloud, and I hope you like it.
We're very much enjoying it. Yes.
We're all just 14-year-olds who want people to like us, really.
Right?
Please like my
Well, I think we want to live other lives too. I'm sure we have all that in common. I mean, as soon as you come up with a story idea, then you think, I can actually enter this person's life and research it and maybe travel or imagine it. But we get to have multiple lives.
I am a big fan of deciding I need to set books in all of these amazing places and then writing it off on my taxes.
Yeah, it is like time travel too, right? A little bit like, yeah, you're kind of living in 2 places at once. Yeah.
Wow. So let's jump to number 3. Who do we go? How about Asha? You ready for this one? And everyone else following. For all the writers out there, what do you believe is the most important craft advice you could give an upcoming historical fiction writer?
Oh my goodness. I just started doing this. I think it's very important to try to not judge your characters. I think you have to try to have empathy for them, even the ones that you don't like, even the ones that maybe aren't likable. They're not sympathetic. That I think the difference between creating complex, fully fleshed out characters and settings and not is trying to see things from their point of view, because we all have motivations.
Mhm.
So I really tried to do that with my characters, even the bad ones, even the racist ones, even the sexist ones. I tried to look at it from their point of view and look at what molded them and why they came to be the way that they were. So that's just some advice I would give. I think you should really try to, while you're writing that character, you are on their side. You are in their head. And then when you're finished, you can go back to being disgusted with them.
I really agree with that. I think early on, when I was writing an early draft of this book in 2015, I was at Hedgebrook, which was a writing residency, and I decided to swap a portion of my draft with another writer who was older, kind of like a mentor figure. And she read it and said, "You don't like this character. I can tell." And that was her greatest advice. Even if that person is sexist or has these views that you don't agree with, you need to go back and really like imbue that character with complexity through your love for them, even if their actions are not changing. And so I think that was such a big lesson that I took away. So I really agree with you, Asha, because that's how we create characters that feel true to life, right? And that's what my goal always is when I'm writing. And I don't need the characters to be likable. I need them to feel realistic. And none of us are likable all the time, And then I also wanted to say that for historical fiction, I think description is so important, especially because we were talking about how it's kind of like time traveling, right? We're going back in time. And I think that the way you might know all the facts about a particular time period, but it's description that allows the reader to move through that world and see your characters' lives clearly. So that's something that's really important to me when I'm writing.
That's kind of off of that. I think description is so important, and the sense details that can really put you there when you're writing it, and then hopefully that transports the reader there too. And for me, what felt important was kind of immersion. So that's what I was going to add to that, was like immersing yourself in that time. And I had a bunch of vintage postcards of Paris up on my wall that I'd gone there with my daughter when she graduated from high school. And that was actually what made me kind of want to write about Paris. I think I was writing something just set in my town and present day. And I was like, I don't want to be here. I want to be there. So that was part of that inspiration. But then also just like with the books or reading things before I'd go to bed too. And then, sometimes a line, a sentence or something would come, and kind of jot it down and wake up and be able to work on that in a more conscious manner in the morning. But that kind of like steeping oneself in that time and place and the characters. I mean, for me, that was easy because they were all like kind of real people too. So I could read some of their books and things and get a sense. But that was the fun of it for me too. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with all that, and thinking of it in terms of immersion, steeping, and then what Crystal and Asha, you were both saying before about not judging things, especially not according to our own time period. I call that presentism. And I try very much to understand the time period I'm writing in. What were the norms then? What was the culture? What were people excited about? All of that stuff. So my example for that would be, I wrote a novel called Behave, based on two real psychologists, the father of behaviorism, John Watson, and his forgotten about wife, Rosalie Rayner Watson. And they did, it's really the foundations of psychology. They did experiments on babies that we now consider horribly disturbing. And he, John Watson, was a classic womanizer and, constantly having affairs, completely egotistical. I found myself, the more research I did, and as I was writing the book, and you all experience this, you become the characters in a sense, really trying to understand the positive aspects of his character. The fact that he was able to recognize this other young woman, Rosalie, as a valuable work partner. The fact that he was ahead of his time in a lot of ways. So although he was a terrible womanizer, he was actually far less racist than the other psychologists of the day who were actually pro-eugenics. They were believing many of the same values that gave rise to Nazi politics. And he actually stood up against that and would give speeches against that. So when we look at these characters, understanding, when it comes to racism, sexism, and everything else, there's gonna be things that feel uncomfortable to us. And there's other things that we actually recognize now as more important than what people in that time period understood, because they couldn't see what was coming. So we have to have that whole round picture. So I ended up actually feeling very sort of empathetic toward John Watson. I would still say most of my readers and the book not very fond of him.
That's such a great term too, presentism.
I love that. I'm definitely.
Let's all use it. Let's tell people
Yes.
not, especially in today's climate. It's so easy for people to take pot shots,
Absolutely. I think that's a really good point too. Like, especially in today's climate, we're hyper aware, and it's a good thing that we're finally paying attention. But you can't apply that to something that happened 100 years ago. People were socialized completely differently. So someone said to me, oh, well, her brother is like mildly patriarchal. And I'm like, mildly is good considering it's 1948.
We're going to jump over to question number 4, starting with Michaela on this one. And it ties in really well with like the direction we're going. So what changes have you seen in the historical fiction genre over the past 10 years? And where do you see it going in the future?
Well, let's see. The past, I just recently, and I don't know if it's because I've been, writing about real people, but I have noticed a lot of the kind of her stories, instead of the histories, like the stories about the unsung women and the heroines, and just more of them. A lot of them on our octagon of new books, so many, and then books too, that take the lesser character in an old novel and making them the heroine of the protagonist of their story. But I love seeing these books. I love reading them. I think probably more of those that I see coming that are combining present day with the past, and maybe even in speculative manners too. I would be so curious what other people are seeing also and are excited about.
Okay, I'll jump in playing off that. So Annie and the Wolves has a historical piece and a modern piece. And so obviously my eyes are more open to that right now. But another recent book that I really love is Upstairs House by Julia Fine. And it is a book about, yay!
Yeah.
So it's a woman going through postpartum depression. And I really like realistic, difficult stories about parenting and mothering, especially. Those appeal to me, even though I love being a mother. But so she has this very realistic story, but then she also brings in Margaret Wise Brown, who was the author of Goodnight Moon. And there's an academic piece to this because she's writing about her, but then there's a speculative piece where there's ghosts in the novel. And so the novel's kind of haunted by Margaret Wise Brown. So that's what I don't think we can call it a trend, but I'm enjoying seeing how history can be brought in as just a piece of the story. And definitely filter through the experience of the modern people, so it's reflecting on more than one time period. and making connections we wouldn't expect.
I love that book. I'm a fan of Julia's. I actually met her when I was living in Chicago, and we became friends because she had a young kid, and then we both had babies recently. And I read that book when I was 3 months postpartum, and it's very much about the postpartum experience. And I just felt very seen, even though it's told through this surrealist ghost lens. But I just wanted to say that I think this is encompassing or connected to what both of you are talking about. I think in the historical fiction genre, we're seeing more space for books that are not written for a Western white male audience. You know, here in this room, we've all written about these women that may have not been valued during their time, right? Or their stories were not recorded during their time. And I think that is so important. And I think that's the greatest, like most hardening thing that I've been seeing in the historical fiction genre. And kind of tied with that is this idea of more complexity. I think we are more okay with sitting with an unlikable female character, which just means a complicated real woman, you know. And in my book, Hemi, I wanted to make her as real as possible. And that means that she is complicated. She has complex feelings about mothering and about her role in society. And she succeeds and fails to live the life that she wants. And I think more and more in books, we have room for those gray areas that reflect life's real complexities. And that's something that I really love writing about and reading.
Yeah, I love seeing the different non-white male perspectives.
Yes,
all-
agreed.
Yeah, it's so important. It's so important for empathy, I think, too, for
Yes.
our culture, you know.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I had some people tell me when I was, trying to get this novel agented and subsequently published, oh, that's like really interesting. But, do you think people will be able to relate to it? And I was just kind of like, I've been reading since I was a toddler. And most of my books have been by white people about white characters. And I've never once stopped and been like, wow, I was really relating to this character and feeling a deep empathy for them. But, stop. Our skin is not the same color. It's just call the whole thing off. Like, it's nonsense. I think fiction breeds empathy, which is why I think it's so important to get as many perspectives as possible.
Good point. I wanted to add, because Crystal, I hadn't really thought about this as a trend or even something I want to be a trend, but this complexity of emotions idea. I realized that. So in my book, I have a lot of angry women characters. And
Me too.
I think if I would have written this book 10 years ago, I mean, I would have gotten different editorial direction, but I think I would have been looking for solutions and closure at the end. I mean, to probably people who still wish I had had more solutions and closure. And instead, there are scenes in the end of the book where the main character is saying 6 months later, yes, I'm still angry. And the chapter just hangs there. Like, we're not going to solve this right now. I wouldn't have written that 10 years ago.
I'm scared to write it now. You're braver than I am. I mean, all I did was give my book a non-unambiguously happy ending. And oh my goodness, that didn't go so well.
But we do need some happy endings are good too. I have a different novel that was going to end really horribly. And then I told my teenage daughter about it. And she said, Mom, do you have to do that again? I said, you know what? I don't. And so I gave them happier endings. So we need all of those endings.
I love happy endings, and I love nice, sweet female characters. But I just think that much like in life, there's room for everything. And there's kind of a time and a place and a context. And my first protagonist was, a lot of people said she was very sweet, shy, lovable, all of those things. And then my next protagonist in the book I'm working on now is arrogant and prickly. And she's got a chip on her shoulder the size of Texas. And it's going to be really interesting to see if readers are willing to go in another direction with me. So I guess fingers crossed.
I think that is so important too. That we can, as women, express anger and be angry and read about angry women characters and yay.
Yeah.
Like, I love that book, Rage Becomes Her. It's so
Yes.
liberating and enlightening. Like, oh my God, yes, I have been a plate smasher and a silent, angry person. Like, enough,
Mhm.
And just that idea of your characters having to be likable to be relatable. Like, there's room for other.
Well, why is it that men are complicated and women are difficult?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's
Or
something
boss.
that's something I pushed back against a lot, especially in grad school. That kind of comment that comes up, this person, I didn't like her. It would always happen when it's a female character.
Yeah.
Whether it was like my workshop or someone else's. And I always wanted to push back and did, especially if it was other people's works, because it's just, it's a gendered, sexist remark, there's sex in my book because people have sex, and there was,
Even historically, are you sure?
yes, right, that was what happened in grad school. Somebody, a male student, male peer, said, I don't know if women during this time would have these like urges, or like desires. And I was just saying, just because it's 1950 doesn't mean women don't have desires, So there are a lot of obstacles, I think, that we are breaking down.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, there's this hilarious blog, and it's I think it's called Men Writing Women.
Oh yeah.
And it's just kind of laughable and cringeworthy at the same time. And you have no problem projecting your thoughts about sexuality onto a woman, but God forbid she have her own thoughts about it.
Right.
And then all of a sudden there's questions that need to be I've always found that interesting. I'm sorry she's not looking at her breasts in wonderment or whatever. Like,
yeah.
That's great. Yeah, my Peggy Guggenheim was like really one of the first kind of modern women. Just one of her famous quotes is she was asked, how many husbands have you had? And she said, mine or, other people, basically. And she, slept with who knows how many men. But she is my favorite character to write. Just her it was like her need to be loved too.
I'm still very intimidated by writing boldly sexual women. That would be kind of a not me. A lot of my characters are not me, but the other thing is that's so discouraged, like even now. That to really get into the head of a woman in a historical setting where it's even more discouraged, who is still like, screw you. This is how I am. This is what I want to do. It kind of entices me, actually. I think I will have to explore that at some point down the line.
You should.
Some of the Goodreads reviews, people couldn't read it. It's too much sex, like alcohol, adultery, and immoral activity.
Michaela may have more nude bodies. We're only at the beginning of the novel, but I think there's more nudity at the beginning of Lenora, The Morning Light, than probably in the rest of ours. I'm just guessing. So maybe that's the craft tip, Corey. The craft tip is if you're gonna have nudity and sex, put it in the beginning. I always put it in the end. That's way too
in the beginning. Get them going.
Puts the people who maybe won't like it off at the beginning, right? So
that's
they don't
right. You decide.
Yeah, just go ahead and put it down after 20 pages.
Right.
Literally 24 hours after my book came out, I gave my boyfriend permission to shock me with a cattle prod if I even uttered the word Goodreads. No thanks.
That's smart.
So for that reason, I think I will take more risks, and I will not go on Goodreads to then see the endless amounts of comments about how my female characters are not the sweet herb of March 24/7.
Do it. Take those risks.
As far as being a librarian goes, Goodreads is also often like a terrible resource sometimes. Like you'll read, there's a book called Ill Will by Dan Shawn. And I think this is the comment I'm remembering, but someone was like, this book was not an appropriate beach read. And it was like one of the most grisly crime novels ever. I was like, did you read the cover flap?
Did you read the synopsis?
Oh my God, it's people, sometimes people, research your books first. Two quick things before we move on to the next question. If we're talking about kind of vengeful women, there's a book called And I Do Not Forgive You by Amber Sparks. And it's the subtitle is In Other Revenges. I think that's what it is. And Amber Sparks writes the best, or she's one of the best like flash fiction and short fiction writers out there. And she oftentimes will blend historical fiction and like fabulism and like all sorts of stuff. So check her out. And Julia Fine's debut novel, What Should You, is also amazing. Like definitely read that.
Wow, I'm getting angry just thinking about it, and I like it.
That is what we like to hear. We're here to inspire anger and revolution. So now we're going to jump back to, I'm going to cut out like two of the questions because we've kind of like summarized them in some of the other answers. But while we're on the topic of book recommendations, we're going to go back to Andromeda because she started us off. Which books are you excited for that have either been released recently or forthcoming? And which up-and-coming authors should people have on their radar?
Well, so I already mentioned Julia Fine's book, Upstairs House. The book that I just pre-ordered that I'm really excited to read is called Love and Fury by Samantha Silva. And it's a historical novel about Mary Wollstonecraft. And I think it's told by her, but it's also some chapters are told by her midwife. So she's giving birth and the midwife tells some of the story. So obviously I haven't read it yet. I only pre-ordered it. But that's another example of interesting structure. You know, it's not just coming at it through the person we know, but also coming at it through a minor character, perhaps someone invented, I'm not sure. But that's a book I'm looking forward to. I'll let the rest of you name entire authors and trends. Go ahead.
I really recommend White Ivy by Susie Yang, since we're on the topic of rather prickly, shamelessly ambitious women. I found that book to be very interesting, and I really like reading about different POC and female experiences. So I very much enjoyed that. And in exchange for me hawking her book constantly, Susie has promised to take me to China. I still haven't been, and I like to go places with locals. I think that's the best way to get to know a place. And then also The Hana Artist by Alkachoshi is great. And I think given what's going on right now with the Supreme Court, I think it's very timely as well.
What was that one called?
The Hana Artist.
The Hana Artist. Okay. Got it.
Cool.
I'm adding to my list too.
My list is ever growing.
I have, let's see, I don't know, The Age of Light is Whitney Scher's book on Lee Miller, who's another surrealist woman photographer, and it's one of those, there's a lot of sex in there. It's really, it's a good story. I would recommend it. It's so well told. And let's see, I have a little stack here. Half-Life is another one. Gillian Cantor is Mary Curie, and then it's speculative in the way that it is her life, and then it's also her life if she didn't marry. if she did marry instead of going to the Sorbonne. So it's kind of those two. And then here's a man. A man's book. Laird Hunt it's Zori. I don't know if you've heard of it, Corey, but it's one of these tiny books, like a novella almost, but it's this woman's whole life. And it's Indiana, starts in the Depression, and it goes through radium, and like she's one of those radium girls in a factory, but it's not really entirely focused on that. It's kind of like in the vein of Willa Cather, really. And I loved it. And then this is the one I just started. Great Circle is Maggie Shipstead, and it's an aviator woman, and then who's back in time, and then there's the modern day woman who's going to play her in a film. And her writing is just outstanding. And then there's so many other books I'm excited about too. But yeah.
I also have like so many books I want to talk about, but I'll keep it to 3. This one, The Arsonist City by Hala Alyan. I think Hala is such a talented writer. She's also a poet. And this one just recently came out, and it's about the Nasser family. And they are living all over Beirut, Brooklyn, Austin, Texas, California. And then when the father decides to sell their home in Beirut, they all go there. And it's really, it's a novel that shows the long shadow of war and migration. And she's a beautiful writer. And then there's a novel coming out, a debut novel in January called Brown Girls by Daphne Palasi Andreadis. Definitely, I feel bad because I don't know exactly how to pronounce her last name, but I heard Daphne reading an excerpt from this, and it is stunning. It's about a group of friends growing up in Queens, a group of Filipina brown girls, and it's really, really beautiful. And that comes out in January. And then another debut, The School for Good Mothers by Jessamine Chan. And it's speaking of, you know, like bad women. It's kind of got a, I don't know what the, maybe surreal, I don't know exactly what the genre would be, but it's an alternative landscape where this woman, Frida, she's Chinese American, and she's having a bad day, and there's a mass surveillance, and if something happens and you leave your child unattended for a second or something, they will deem you a bad mother and make you go to this school for good mothers. And I think it's about mass surveillance. It's about what does it mean to be a good mother? It's all of these questions, and that's coming out in January, I think. Yeah.
Gotta put that on my list.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, my list is gonna topple over and crush me.
I know, me too. But those are my recs, and I can put them in the comments if that helps.
That would probably be amazing.
Definitely.
We'll do that right now.
So those are all amazing recommendations, and a lot of them can be found at Sturgis Library in the coming future. So if you're local,
Nice.
That's like my whole thing is always like, come to the library. We will give you books. It'll be great. So we've got one last quick question before we get to the Q&A. This is always my favorite one to ask because one, it deals with time travel. It's writing advice. So who doesn't love both of those things? Who was our second person? I'm just going to let anyone answer this because I can't remember what order we went in. But the question is, if you could go back in time and talk to the young version of yourself, what would you say, what advice would you give the young writer you?
Well, I'll start. It would probably be about the same advice that I try to give myself now. Like, just keep showing up, keep having faith. Because I guess, I've written 2 novels now, and I'm on my 3rd, but it's still showing up for the unknown, and it's scary, and it's, it can be so maddening, and all of it is still so true. And I guess I would have thought that by now, it would have gotten easier, maybe, or something. But and maybe it is because like, at least I have an agent to send it to if I do, get a draft that's worth it. But writing is hard. Writing is not easy, and so to not look so much to the outside world for reception and worth as a writer, because it just it never feels the same, I think, as you think that it will.
Mhm.
Something like that. It's just still showing up to do the work, so, and having a lot of faith.
Mhm.
And to find community, maybe, too, and really just so you're not alone, because writing is such a lonely endeavor. So to embrace community and be forgiving to yourself and kind to yourself and all that. Yeah.
I'll jump in with something else that we may know, but I know like I forget it all the time. I have to keep relearning it, and I've forgotten it a lot in the last couple of years. I really need to work on it, which is really to focus on the process, enjoying the writing of the book, because kind of addressing what you were saying, all those other little things, the publication, the reviews, the book launch. I was just reading an agent's newsletter. She said that fireworks versus firewood, and all those little things that happen, like a good review are fireworks. Yay, celebrate them, but they're not firewood. They're not going to burn and keep you going like relationships and learning and all that. But so I think as historical novelists, we're really lucky because some writers just sit in front of a computer, typewriter, whatever, that's what they do. But I think we, more than a lot of writers, we have the opportunity to travel, but also several of you have mentioned interviewing family members, using it as a way to get to know your family, eating fantastic food. We haven't talked about learning foreign languages. I've always incorporated some foreign language learning in my research process. We all still never get as far as we want to get and make mistakes, but there's so much that we actually get to do hands-on as historical novelists that is so fun that if you look back and think, what if this book were never even published? I think we would still be happy with the experiences we had. So again, I learned it, but I got to keep remembering it.
Yeah, it is. It's enjoying the process. That is, it's so true. Because that's when the book is yours. And then when it's published, it's gone. It's not yours anymore, right? Yeah.
That's so true. And I think that when I'm writing and enjoying the process, that's when the pages are good. And when I'm forcing it, sometimes it's just, that means I need to take a break. But I was thinking about this, like what would the advice be? And I think a lot of it for me is this idea of confidence, but also, so when I was young, I think 7, there was a boy who in my class who said, like, what are you? And I said, a girl, because that was the main difference that I saw between us. But he was just like, no, what are you? And I kind of understood what he meant. I said Korean. And his answer really stuck with me for a long time, because he said, no, you're either Chinese or Japanese. Because to him, he had never heard of Korean. And so it just didn't exist. And that is just like a little example of this idea that I think I grew up with, straddling these identities of being Korean and American, where I felt like for a long time, I've always wanted to be a writer, but for a long time, I thought that the stories that I was interested in were not important, or they were important to me, but would not be important to others. And so something that I would give, the advice that I would give my younger self is to write, believe in your stories, believe in their worth. They're valuable and they will find their audience. And I think that the landscape, as we've talked about today, has changed so much in publishing and reading, where we are valuing all these other perspectives. So that is the advice that I would give myself or any kind of young writer who wants to write about a subject, a person, a time period that hasn't yet been deeply explored.
Oh my goodness. You just spoke to me. I also used to get the what are you question. They'd be like, one of your parents came to pick you up and they look one way, and the other one of your parents came to pick you up and they look another way. And I'm deeply confused. You confuse me, Asha. Well, why are you concerned? Oh my goodness. I think, this is weird for me to give my younger self advice because I'm only 26. But the advice I would give to myself is that just because people tell you you're worthless doesn't mean you are. That's their problem. And don't let people silence you. At the end of the day, to your point, I think your stories are meaningful. They are important. Don't let anyone tell you that they're not. They will find the people who need them. And the people who don't need them, there's thousands of other books in the sea, take a very polite hike. You don't have to be everyone's cup of tea. The only way to please everyone is to have nothing to say. If you say anything, someone is going to not like it, but for someone else, it's going to be really powerful and transformative and important. I mean, one thing that helped me was I went and looked at reviews of books that have literally changed my life. Like they are a part of me. And I saw that there were people who hated them and who thought they were complete crap and who left these 6-page condescending, snarky diatribes breaking down, it was basically like, let me count the ways in which I hate this terrible book. And I just couldn't even wrap my brain around it because these books are like my children. That's how much affection I have for them. And then it kind of clicked for me that it just is so subjective. It just is. You can't write for everyone because you can't peer inside everyone's soul and see every experience that they've ever had. You don't know what's going to resonate with them and what's going to put them off. You don't know and you can't know. You'll drive yourself crazy. So write from your heart. Take constructive criticism, which is not what you find on Goodreads. And just be bold and be brave. Writing takes a lot of rejection, and the rejection never stops coming. Even when you get an agent, even when you get a publisher, you get that 6-figure deal, you get to be on Good Morning America. And then, some people leave you nasty reviews, and that's the way that cookie crumbles. There is no way around rejection as a writer. You have to kind of just accept it as part of the craft and move forward and not seek validation from the outside world.
And now everyone's younger self is enlightened. So, excellent job, everyone. Yeah, so we've reached the end of our questions. So now we have about 10, 15 minutes to do some sweet Q&A. So like I said earlier, if you want to send some questions over through chat, I will ask them as they come in. If some questions end up like piggybacking on each other, we'll just combine them and see where it goes. But like I said, I'm going to put a link also right now in the chat to where you can buy the author's books. They're all indie places. Some of them are local to us. Some of them are local to the writers themselves. So give them a look and send me some great questions, please. There's always the minute or two where people are like typing away.
I didn't know that someone could actually think that Korea is not like a thing.
Yeah.
I'm shocked by that.
Korea is in the news so much now, but I think when I was growing up, it was just something that not everybody knew about. And so that question, just the confidence of this little boy telling me that I'm not Korean really just jarred me,
Crazy to me.
I know, because it's like, I know what I am.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of when I was in school and I went to a very white, rich prep schools, and people used to insist that I had to like certain things. Or that I had to be good at sports or something. And it was just like, where are you getting this?
Yeah.
It starts so young. You don't realize it until you're older how early people start to form their preconceived notions about people just off the way you look.
Well, and that statement too, like, no, you're not, because I don't know what that is. Like,
right, like the world revolves around me and my limited knowledge of things.
Disregarding your yourself, because it's so good to remember, and that's how people are. I mean,
Yeah. It starts, it can start young. And I think that's why I think there's such a diversity in YA and children's literature as well now. And that is so important compared to at least when I was growing up. So all of that. makes such a
It's really, it's so good to see that now too. And in kids' books also coming out. Just, yeah, it's a wider range of experience that's so important right now.
It sounds like some of us in our fiction too are addressing that "what are you? I don't get who you are" question. Like I know, and it's a spoiler, but we have a pretty small audience here. I have a character in not my current book, but the one before, where it's always assumed she's Japanese, and her heritage is way more complicated than that. Because, you know, portraying a world in which, especially she's living in Tokyo, to admit that she has different mixed heritage is not going to be easy, and it invites people looking into her other secrets. But so even just this cultural issue that we're all living right now is entering fiction as well, like how people label people, how people see themselves, and the fatigue people have in explaining themselves to others as a character experience as well.
Ooh, we have a question.
There we go. Yes, from La Quinta Library, which I wish I remember your name. She's a librarian who is out in California, whose book group is reading, I believe, Crystal's book.
I think Jade.
Yeah. So the question is, just got bumped off my screen. Do you think there are any side characters you consider revisiting and maybe writing a story for, whether a film or not? Cool question.
That is a cool question. Well, when I started my novel, I started in graduate school, and it was actually, these characters were just one part of a 3-generational story. So it was going to be kind of like an expansive, interconnected short story collection, and they were just kind of a little part. And it was my professor who said, I think you have a novel here. I think you can like hold off on these other characters and just develop this story. So I have all these stories of the daughters of Hemi, because in this book they're young. And so sometimes I wonder, do I want to explore their lives and how they are as women, you know, especially because I know already how they have been impacted by their parents. So sometimes I wonder about that, because I personally love reading books by authors where it's all set in the same universe. You know, I love Louise Erdrich and how her characters always show up in other books. So it's something that I want to do maybe one day, but not what I'm working on now. What about you all?
Yeah, well, I was thinking too of Emily St. John Mandel does that, and some of her recent novel took a couple of the side characters from an earlier one, and then this is all about them, and I just loved that. I read the earlier one later, but it all worked out. For me, there were just, Leonore Finney was one of my favorite side characters. And I would love to write something with her at the center, because she is just such a strong feminist powerhouse, amazing artist. And then the other character, I mean, Peggy is like a smaller character in my book than Max and Leonora, and she became my favorite character to write. And I just, like, part of me would love to take a part of her life later on and write some of that. But yeah, we'll see. How about you all, the rest?
I will say we didn't talk about one of the things, another thing that is hard to learn as a historical novelist is what to leave out. I've definitely been accused of putting too much history in my historical novels, often because I start out with a cast of characters and then they live in this time period where they're surrounded by other artists, musicians, fascinating people, politicians, and it's hard to not include them. But even having said that, yeah, once you get to know like a time period in a world, so my first book, Spanish Bow, set in Spanish Civil War and World War II in Europe, there are so many, I squeezed in Picasso and a bunch of composers and all that, but there were other photographers and artists that I would still love to spin off into other things, because I'm just not tired of the period. Yeah,
and not trying to when there's just too much great stuff to put in. You can't
I
have it all
agree.
in.
I think especially when you build a world and you spend years building that world, and there's all of these characters, and some of them really surprise you, right? Like I had a minor character in my novel who was a servant who was in love with the young master of the household, and like I really enjoyed writing from her perspective in a way that caught me off guard. I really think a lot of people have been pushing me for a sequel. A lot of people, I get at least 2 or 3 messages a day saying it can't be over, where's the rest, what happens to her? And I have honestly, I had no intention of writing a sequel. It was going to be a standalone novel. That was it. Honestly, by the time I finished editing it about 200 times, I was like, I never want to see you again. But I think it would, I can't totally take it off the table because I do love these characters so much.
So we have time for one more question before we all head out for the night. But this is from Ty. They ask, what kinds of details did you all find to be most important in creating a compelling and full sense of place? How did sense phenomena play in and or the natural world and any other elements?
All right, I will jump in with climate and weather, because I think we read a lot of books where, and I've done this too, but where there's the food, there's the drapery, there's, the clothing, all that. But climate and weather it helps me get into the sense of place. And in some cases, there can be metaphors too. So my last novel is called Plum Rains, takes place in Japan and Taiwan during the season that is called the plum rains, very wet season. And again, having lived there and experiencing how another name for it is the mold rains, which is not so pleasant, but how this oppressive rainy time can actually affect how people interact and where they live and what they do, and become a metaphor for the characters interested in me. And then also how it feels to break out of that when you finally have blue skies again. So I cannot imagine writing a book where you don't think once about the weather and the climate and how that would actually affect people.
Yeah. For me, something that was important felt like the moon cycle with the days, because Max, Ernst is like fleeing on foot and is going through the night, and then there's the next day, and he's going by the moonlight. So like, when did the moon rise? What day of the moon cycle was it? And then what day? So trying to track the moon, because it always kind of bothers me in books where the moon isn't the right moon if they mentioned it earlier. So I really tried to get that right.
That's when I Google too. I'm like, on this year and this month, when was the full moon? I Google that all the time.
I love doing that because it feels like productive procrastination. All the little details I will check and make sure that it's the right season, the right date. I think that's this is a hard, Ty's question is hard because I love writing a lot of details. I think I mentioned like description is one way to really immerse your reader into the character. So I love writing details. And I think for If You Leave Me, one of the things that I was really focused on was food, because everyone is hungering so much, and the lack of food, the lack of stability, all of that drives the novel. But I think that when you are writing about war or the aftermath of war, it can kind of feel flattened or abstract if you haven't lived through it, right? Or if it's just written about in terms of facts. So I try to use food or the absence of it or the plenty of it, or how people are driven to kind of like hoard food or eat food slowly even after they have reached security because of that previous hunger. I think that is something that I constantly try to embed into the novel. Also, I love eating and describing food as well. So that is another perk.
It makes me want to read your novel.
Okay.
and eat all the food.
Things. I want to read all your novels.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I agree with everyone else about the nature details. And then I also think one thing I usually try to do is to like highlight some of the mindsets of the time through the different characters and maybe show some of the opposing different views and the crux of the issue as things are constantly changing and progressing and moving forward. And I think, my novel is called 50 Words for Rain. So one of the fun things I got to do was to look up all the different Japanese words for rain and the way that they had been used before in poetry and in art, and just the idea that something so mundane and so frequent could have all of these beautiful variations really stuck with me. So I just I really agree with what the rest of you said about just finding something to grab onto that feels real and not abstract.
I think we all answered that one.
Yeah.
Do we all go through it?
Although
It's always
Asha, okay, fine. I'll ask you a question, Asha. You may not be a tattoo person, but if you are, I mean, there must be some incredible, beautiful characters in Japanese for rain that one could you see as a calligraphy or a tattoo or something. Were you drawn to the visual aspect of that?
So I've studied Japanese for about 12, 13 years now. But I have this gift that my godmother gave me is this book full of all the kanji characters for the different words for rain. When she found that I wanted to write this book, and I have that when I one day have an office of my own, and I'm not just rotating from basement to basement, I will hang it up on the wall next to the cover of my book. As for a tattoo, I'm deathly afraid of needles, so that's kind of out.
So on that tattoo note, we've come to the end of our panel tonight, right? So what we usually do is everyone can give a nice silent round of applause. Imagine like a stadium full of people just like, woo! But again, being writers, you have to use your imagination to do that. A big thanks to everyone who came out tonight. A big thanks to all our writers. If all our writers could stick around for like 2 seconds after the program so we could just debrief, that'd be great. But otherwise, if people want to send over some happy thoughts in the chat or pop on screen for a moment to do like a round of applause, you can totally do that. But otherwise, if you want to head out, that would be great. So thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.